There was a moment in September 2019 when Officer Dana Pruitt was walking through the Callaway County Sheriff's Office on her first week on the job, and she saw a photograph on a bulletin board that stopped her cold. She had walked past that photo every day of her childhood. It sat on the mantel in her parents' living room, yellowed at the edges and tilted slightly in its frame. Her father never let anyone straighten it. The photograph was of a woman named Loretta Harwell, 23 years old, dark-haired, 5'4", with the kind of face people described as warm before they described it as anything else. Loretta had gone missing on the last Thursday of October 1971. The case had never been solved. 48 years had come and gone. 3 generations of Callaway County residents had grown up knowing her name without knowing her story. And now, a rookie officer stood in the hallway of the building where her case had lived in silence for nearly 5 decades, staring at her own reflection in the features of a woman she had never met but somehow recognized. Because Dana Pruitt was Kenneth Pruitt's daughter, and Kenneth Pruitt was the man who killed Loretta Harwell. But before we get to any of that, we have to go back to October 1971. Because to understand what justice finally meant for this case, you first have to understand who Loretta was. Callaway County, Missouri sits in the center of the state, where the Missouri River bends south and the land flattens into farmland that seems to go on forever. In the fall of 1971, it was exactly the kind of place where people still talked to each other from their front porches, and where the local diner ran the same Tuesday meatloaf special it had been running since 1954. The county seat, Fulton, had a population just under 10,000. It had a Woolworth's, a drive-in movie theater that showed double features on Friday nights, and a weekly newspaper that covered church socials alongside local news. Nixon was in the White House. The Vietnam War was on the evening news every night. But in Fulton, most people still felt the way small towns used to feel. Slow, watchable, known. Loretta Harwell had lived in Callaway County her entire life. She had grown up on her family's property out on Route B, gone to school in Fulton, and taken a job as a bookkeeper for Callaway Farm Supply after graduating from high school in 1966. She was 23 years old in the fall of 1971, and everyone who knew her said the same thing. She was the kind of person who made places feel better by being in them. She kept meticulous records at the supply store, arriving 15 minutes early every morning and leaving a note for her boss with anything she thought he should know. She drove a blue 1967 Chevrolet Impala that she'd saved for 2 years to buy. And every Sunday, without exception, she drove her grandmother to the First Baptist Church on Market Street and sat in the third pew from the front. Because that was where her grandmother had always sat, and Loretta saw no reason to change that now. She was engaged to be married. Gary Whitfield, who worked at the grain elevator on Highway 54, had proposed to her in June of that year. They planned a spring wedding. Loretta had already picked the fabric for her dress. She was also, according to the people who knew her, beginning to be frightened. Records from the original case file document that Loretta had spoken to at least 2 co-workers in the weeks before she disappeared, telling them that a man she knew had been coming around more than she wanted, and that she had made clear she wasn't interested, but he wasn't listening. She didn't name him in those conversations, at least not in any record that survived. She told her co-worker Dorothy Marsh that she thought it would pass, that it probably wasn't anything serious. Dorothy would repeat that conversation word for word to investigators for the rest of her life, wishing Loretta had named him. That autumn in Fulton smelled like leaf smoke and creek mud. The elm trees along Market Street turned orange so fast it seemed like they caught fire overnight. The drive-in on Old Highway 40 was showing Dirty Harry and Fiddler on the roof, and on the last Thursday of October, those were the two shows listed on the marquee when Loretta Jean Harwell drove past it on her way home from work and was never seen alive again. The timeline, as investigators reconstructed it from witness statements in the days that followed, was narrow and specific. At 5 p.m., Loretta clocked out at Callaway Farm Supply. Her boss, Earl Renner, remembered that she had stopped in his office doorway and told him she'd leave the quarterly reconciliation on his desk for Monday. She seemed normal. Nothing stood out. At 5:22 p.m., the owner of Devers Filling Station on the eastern edge of Fulton saw a blue Impala that matched the description of Loretta's car pull in, take on gas, and leave heading west on Route B. At 5:45 p.m., her fiancé Gary Whitfield tried calling her at the number for her parents' house, where she was staying temporarily while her apartment was being painted. Nobody answered. He assumed she was still driving. By 7:00 p.m., nobody had answered. Gary drove the Route B road himself, looking for her car on the shoulder. He didn't find it. At 7:30 p.m., he called the sheriff's department. By 8:00 p.m., Loretta's blue Impala was found parked on the gravel turnout off Keller Road, a quarter mile from the intersection with Route B. The engine was cold, the driver's door was unlocked, her purse was on the passenger seat, her keys were on the floorboard. She was gone. The Callaway County Sheriff's Department launched a search that night. Volunteers came out the next morning, neighbors, church members, farmers who left their fields at first light. They searched the creek bottoms and the timber ground along Keller Road. They searched barns and outbuildings. They found nothing. The blue Impala gave up no evidence that made sense. No blood, no signs of struggle. One deputy noted in his report that the driver's seat appeared to have been pushed back slightly, as though someone taller than Loretta had sat in it. That detail was logged. It would matter later. 48 years later, Loretta's grandmother sat in the third pew from the front at First Baptist that Sunday without her. She would do so for the next 31 years, until she died in 2002, still waiting for someone to tell her what happened to her girl. The lead investigator on Loretta's case was Sheriff's Deputy Raymond Coulter, 34 years old, who had grown up 2 counties over and joined the Callaway Department in 1968. Coulter was not a man given to dramatic statements. He was methodical and slow and deeply private. He also cared about this case in a way his supervisor, Sheriff Dale Pittman, occasionally had to remind him to keep in proportion. Raymond would go home and sit with this case at his kitchen table, according to a 1998 interview Coulter gave to the Fulton Sun. It bothered him the way cold water bothers a bad tooth. The early investigation produced 2 persons of interest. The first was a man named Darrell Sykes, 31, who had gotten into a dispute with Loretta's fiancé Gary Whitfield over a fencing contract the previous summer. Investigators interviewed him twice. His alibi for the evening of October 28th checked out against the records of a gas station card game he'd been in until well past 9. He was eliminated. The second person of interest was never formally named in any document released to the public. He was described in Coulter's notes only as a local man, known to the victim, approximately 30 to 40 years of age, who had been reported by colleagues as unwanted in the victim's company in the weeks prior to the incident. That man was interviewed once, in November of 1971, and released. No further action was documented. Whether the investigation failed to find sufficient evidence or whether something else stopped it in its tracks, that question would not get an answer for a very long time. By the spring of 1972, the formal investigation had stalled. Sheriff Pittman had other cases. Resources were finite. Raymond Coulter was transferred to a different assignment. Loretta's file was moved from active to cold, not closed, never officially closed, but no longer receiving working attention. Gary Whitfield waited another 2 years before he accepted that he would never know what happened to her. He eventually moved to Columbia. He never returned to Fulton. What institutions failed to do, one woman refused to stop doing. Dorothy Marsh, Loretta's co-worker at Callaway Farm Supply, spent the next 3 decades writing letters to the Sheriff's Department, to the State Attorney General's office, to newspaper editors across mid-Missouri. She sent a letter every year on the anniversary of Loretta's disappearance. Every October 28th, she sat down and wrote. Most of those letters went unanswered. Some received form responses. Not one produced a follow-up investigation. Dorothy was 74 years old and still writing those letters when the case finally broke open. Every case on this channel represents weeks of research, verifying facts, and piecing together real lives that deserved better. If you want us to keep uncovering the truth behind stories like this one, take a second to like and subscribe, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now, let's get back to Loretta. The case of Loretta Jean Harwell had been cold for 47 years when Dana Pruitt graduated from the Missouri Department of Public Safety's Peace Officer Standards and Training Program in July of 2019. She was 24 years old and had grown up in Callaway County. She had wanted to be in law enforcement since she was a teenager. She was drawn to the idea of making things right, of bringing order to the parts of the world that had gone crooked. Her father, Kenneth Pruitt, had been working in equipment sales since the early 1980s and had by 2019 been running a small repair shop out of a county road just north of Fulton for 15 years. He was well regarded. He coached youth soccer in the 1990s. He came to Dana's graduation and stood in the front row. What Dana did not know, what no one in her life had told her, was that her father was 68 years old, and that he had moved to Callaway County from a neighboring county in the fall of 1971, shortly after a woman named Loretta Jean Harwell disappeared on a road he knew well. She found out the way she found out about the photograph, gradually, then all at once. On a Tuesday morning in October 2019, Dana was assigned to help archive a set of older case materials that were being digitized by the department. She was given a box. The box was labeled with a file number and a year, 1971. Inside, between the inventory sheets and the interview transcripts, was a single evidence log referencing a driver's seat adjustment in a blue 1967 Chevrolet Impala, and a physical description of the unnamed person of interest, male, approximately 6 feet 1 inch, brown hair, 30 to 35 years of age, employed in agricultural equipment. Dana stared at that description. She read it again. Then she read it a third time. Her father was 6 feet tall. He had turned 35 in October of 1971. He had worked in agricultural equipment for 20 years before moving into sales. She set the file down on her desk. She sat for a very long time. Then she walked to her supervisor's office and knocked on the door. "I think I need you to look at something," she said, "and I need you to tell me I'm wrong." Her supervisor, Sergeant Gail Torrance, was not able to tell her that. The subsequent investigation moved quickly by the standards of a 48-year-old cold case. Sergeant Torrance immediately recused Dana from any further involvement and assigned the reinvestigation to Detective Marcus Webb, a 20-year veteran of the Callaway County Department who had worked cold cases for the Missouri State Highway Patrol before joining the county in 2011. Webb pulled the original case file in its entirety. He found Raymond Coulter's original notes, including the reference to the unnamed person of interest and the record of the single interview conducted in November of 1971. The interview record described a man who gave his name as Kenneth Arnold Pruitt. He had been living in Callaway County for 3 weeks at the time of the interview. He stated he had met Loretta Harwell through his work delivering equipment parts to Callaway Farm Supply and had spoken to her on several occasions. He stated he had no involvement in her disappearance and provided an alibi for the evening of October 28th. He said he had been at a bar in Fulton with 2 men he named. Those men were contacted. Both stated they recalled seeing him that evening, but were uncertain of the exact time. The interview was not pursued further. Detective Webb obtained a DNA sample from a coffee cup discarded by Kenneth Pruitt during a routine traffic stop, a stop that Sergeant Torrance had quietly arranged without alerting Pruitt to the investigation. The sample was submitted to the Missouri State Highway Patrol's laboratory for comparison against biological material recovered from Loretta's vehicle in 1971 and preserved in the Callaway County Evidence Storage. The process works by comparing the genetic profile from crime scene evidence directly against a known sample from a suspect, a standard technique that, by 2019, had closed cold cases across the country where physical evidence had survived. In Loretta's case, the evidence had survived. The sample from beneath the driver's seat of the blue Impala, collected on the night of October 28, 1971, and stored in a sealed envelope for 48 years, had survived. On November 22, 2019, the laboratory confirmed a match. Kenneth Arnold Pruitt's DNA was in that car. He had been there. The driver's seat had been pushed back to accommodate someone his height. He had driven that car, or sat in it, on the night Loretta Jean Harwell disappeared. Sheriff's investigators brought Kenneth Pruitt in for formal questioning on a Thursday morning in December 2019. He arrived at the Callaway County Sheriff's Office with a composed expression, wearing a collared shirt and a Carhartt jacket. He sat down across from Detective Webb and a representative from the Missouri Attorney General's office. He appeared calm. He did not ask for an attorney immediately. What happened in the next 4 hours was documented in full in the case record. Kenneth Pruitt, who had lived in Callaway County for 48 years, who had coached youth soccer, who had stood in the front row at his daughter's law enforcement graduation ceremony, told investigators that he had been obsessed with Loretta Harwell from the moment he met her at the farm supply store in the summer of 1971. He had driven past her apartment. He had shown up at places where he knew she would be. He had been told more than once, in terms he described as not polite, that she was not interested and that he should stop. On the evening of October 28th, he had followed her car from Fulton. She had pulled over on Keller Road when she realized she was being followed. He had gotten into the car with her. What happened next, he described in a flat and careful voice, as though recounting something that had happened to someone else. She did not survive. He had driven her car to the turnout off Keller Road and left it there. He had walked back to his own vehicle. He had gone home. He had never spoken about it to another person. Not in 1971. Not in 1985. Not when he married Dana's mother in 1988. Not in the 51 years that followed. He had believed the alibi would hold, and that without a body, Loretta's remains have never been found. Though investigators conducted an extensive search of properties associated with Pruitt following his confession, no case could ever be made. He had not counted on his own daughter becoming a law enforcement officer. He had not counted on a file being digitized in October 2019. He had not counted on evidence surviving 48 years in a sealed envelope. He had not counted on a great many things. Kenneth Arnold Pruitt was charged with first-degree murder in December 2019. He entered a guilty plea in February 2021 after a period of delay driven by health issues and legal proceedings related to his age. He was 70 years old at the time of his plea. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He is currently incarcerated at the Jefferson City Correctional Center. His daughter, Dana Pruitt, resigned from the Callaway County Sheriff's Office in January 2020. According to reporting by the Fulton Sun, she issued a brief statement. "I did the job I was trained to do," she said. "I have to believe that is what matters." She has not spoken publicly about the case since. Dorothy Marsh, who had written 47 letters, one for every October 28th from 1972 to 2018, was reached by a reporter for the Columbia Missourian in December 2019. She was 82 years old. When told that an arrest had been made, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I never stopped writing. I just never stopped." There is a photograph on the bulletin board of the Callaway County Sheriff's Office that has been there for so long that no one who works there now can remember a time before it. The photograph is of a dark-haired woman, 23 years old, with the kind of face people describe as warm before they describe it as anything else. The edges are sharp now. It was reprinted for the renewed case file in 2019. But the image itself is from 1971, taken at a Sunday church gathering on a clear October morning, about 3 weeks before everything changed. Loretta Jean Harwell never got to choose the third pew from the front again. She never got to wear the dress she picked out. She never got to do any of the ordinary, irreplaceable things she had planned for the next 50 years of her life. What she got instead was a coworker who never stopped writing, a piece of evidence that survived in a sealed envelope for half a century, and a young woman who walked through the door of the right building at the right moment and was brave enough to do something about what she found. Justice for Loretta Harwell came 48 years late. That is a long time. It is an unacceptable amount of time. But it came. What does it say about the 1971 investigation that a single interview of the primary suspect was conducted and then abandoned? What would it mean to you if you were Dana Pruitt, if the work you chose to do led you to the truth about someone in your own home? And how many cases like this one are still sitting in evidence boxes, waiting for the right set of eyes at the right moment? Justice found Loretta Jean Harwell after 48 years. Stories like hers are why this channel exists. If you believe truth is worth pursuing no matter how long it takes, subscribe. More cases are waiting in the description below. Thank you for being here.